Oh, and also, all right, we are live on YouTube. This is the June 18th, 2024 meeting of the Node.js Loaders team. Link to the doc. So we have a few things to discuss. Basically, the work that's going on right now with the PR that Paolo and Gabrielle are working on for trying to fix the off-thread loader stuff. Although I don't think either of them are here. And then we also have Joey's proposal for the sync hook. And then I posted an issue yesterday, basically just asking people, like, now that we know what it's going to take essentially to finish the off-thread hooks, are we sure we still want that approach? If so, specifically, what within that off-thread should we do? Or if not, well, then that's a whole nother question of like, what do you think hooks look like? You know, presumably, Joey's proposal or some merger of the existing hooks and Joey's proposal. So, I guess if Gabrielle and Paolo aren't here, maybe we should start with the question of the sync hooks or the sync. Well, Joey, what do you think? Should we talk about your proposal first, or talk about the question of what to do about the existing hooks relative to your proposal first?
I guess my proposal is kind of like what it goes, like where it goes kind of depend on the other decision. So I guess we should talk about the other one first.
Okay, like if we end up making the other hooks on thread, that'll affect your proposal. In other words,
Sorry?
like if we undo the off threadness of the existing hooks, then that presumably would have some impact on your proposal. So let's maybe try to make. I don't know if we can really make that decision right now with 5 people, but we can at least maybe see what we all think among the 5 of us, and then try to get more feedback from everybody else to try to kind of make it feel a little more final. Um, so, what what are people's opinions on that? Yeah, James.
Yeah, so first off, the reason I said same earlier is because I'm still trying to just like kind of pay attention and learn everything that's going on and try to understand how it fits in with my goals. But saying that, I haven't yet understood the reasoning for moving the loaders into a separate thread. And I was just reviewing the issue you put up yesterday, and Gil had posted his just a few minutes ago, and I think most of the votes in that thread are leaning toward option 3 as being the primary choice. And from my limited knowledge, I think that would make things a lot easier
And when you say your goals, what are your goals?
to support APM products.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think I've heard the same from Stephen, who I think is also working in that space. Um, I mean, the pitch to go the off threadness was for a bunch of different reasons. And try to make the code more isolated and things like that. Although the hooks aren't isolated from each other, but they're at least isolated from application code. Although maybe nowadays we have other ways of isolating them. The kind of I think to me the most important reason was we wanted to have a single set of hooks or a single hooks API that would function across CSM and CommonJS. That we wanted to eventually sunset the monkey patching of the CommonJS loader, which was never really it's never been officially supported. We don't document it. People are doing it because it's the only way they can achieve various things that they need to do, but it sucks. And, we should just provide proper official documented APIs for them to do what they need to do. And so it was thought that like only by having it be off thread can we preserve the hooks that at the time already existed for customizing the ESM loader, but let them function synchronously to support the CommonJS loader. Because you can kind of do trickiness with atomic and syncifying like code that runs in a thread. But of course, maybe we didn't think of or consider long enough the option of just making the thread sync and for both ESM and CommonJS, and then that's the other way that a single set of hooks can support both systems. Internally, the resolve hook for the ESM loader is already sync. The load hook is not, but that would be the challenge of like how do we deal with an async load hook, or could we figure out how to syncify the ESM loader's load hook? That would be the main challenge in moving the hooks back on thread. Yeah, Joey?
So my understanding of the APN use case is kind of like, so they're trying to wrap original values, and the isolation goal of the off-brand model is like directly goes against what they're trying to do, because what they don't want is isolation, because they want to just patch the original thing, ideally on the main thread, or like main context. Another thing with the synchronous aspect of the load hook, I think there's already a synchronous path in the ESM loader for require ESM and custom require in loader hooks. So there is already this path that just throws an error when you have HTTP import, but otherwise it's synchronous.
I mean, look at it another way. Say we went through with this and we make the current hook back on the main thread. Who is going to complain from that change? Like, hooks authors who need to rewrite their hooks obviously are going to be annoyed at yet another change. But like who is going, aside from like the fact that we're making work for people, which of course sucks, but like once they get over it and do the work, who's going to complain that like, oh, I needed something from this off-thread behavior that is gone now? Is there anyone who would like open an issue complaining about that? And if so, what would it be? Like, what would they be feeling the loss of?
I think what this would break would be the ability to affect CJS, like require in CJS, but you also want to do asynchronous stuff that affect this. Because the async stuff, the off-thread stuff is necessary to hook into require in CJS modules that are imported in a synchronous way.
I thought that was only because the ESM stuff is asynchronous. So the existing hooks are asynchronous. But if they became synchronous, then wouldn't it be okay?
If the existing hooks are still asynchronous, like user like hooks, if they are still asynchronous functions, you cannot invoke them in the somehow like in the require of the imported CJS, because require is synchronous. So the customization of require in imported CJS is relying on this off-thread thing to the async synchronous stuff. So that means that it will break people relying on this to customize require in imported CJS. Although that's kind of like a subset of the CJS customization problem, because CJS imported by the CJS loader are always unaffected by the current loader hooks.
But I think the proposal is to get rid of the other thread and make the hooks synchronous.
Which proposal are you talking about?
The thing that Joffrey
Like
just said.
option number 3 on that issue.
I think by moving the in thread, the breakage would be to break Antoine's previous pull request to make module register effect require in imported CJS. That would break. But other than that,
Is that just because of how it was implemented or because of some like logical like impossibility?
yeah, that's just logically impossible because the way it customizes, if you all the imported CJS has a special require, and when you do a require and you have module registered, like module that registered hooks, then it calls out to the other thread and do atomics 08 on it to call the asynchronous user hook function. And if you bring that in the same thread again, it cannot do that anymore because it cannot, like in the synchronous require, call a asynchronous function and get the results on
Wait,
the
but
same
there's
thread.
no more asynchronous function.
No, user hooks are asynchronous. I mean, user hooks are.
But
The existing user
that's
hooks.
what the proposal is suggesting, that not only are we bringing them back on thread, but we're also going to convert the hook to be sync.
Yeah, like the proposal is never two of those things separately. It's them together.
Which one and which one together?
So like if we get rid of the separate thread, then part of that change will be to force all of the hooks to be synchronous. Not
Oh, okay.
synchronous, but like no more async.
Oh, I see. So I guess the breakage would be to kind of like force all the existing hooks to convert their asynchronous functions to synchronous functions.
Right. The break. I mean, that was in that thread. I asked those 2 questions at the bottom of like who's actually writing async functions for the resolve and load hooks, because those are the people who we'd be breaking. You know, like they would have to figure out another way to do what they're doing, you know, using synchronous functions. Now, maybe that's as simple as like changing an await read file to read file sync, you know, but like they're making network calls, like they're doing HTTP imports or something, then they have a much harder time migrating.
I mean, Bradley, who started up the HTTP modules thing, has said just ignore them because nobody's using them.
I mean, that's fine for him to say. We need to like verify that that's correct. But like, I think he's right. I bet he's right. But yeah, right.
What I was trying. Oh, I think I did some investigation about like how many of them actually has to be asynchronous, and most like packages that I found that are kind of like doing that are already using like asynchronous hooks in with module register or dash loader. I think most of them are like have a counterpart that's synchronous because the loaders, the ESM loaders, they're experimental. So like any people actually using them in production, they kind of like have a pre-existing or like accompanying thing that's monkey patching CJS. So like we have this experimental thing, but we also have this more stable thing for CJS. And the CJS thing is going to be asynchronous anyway. So I think for those people, they can just like, just reuse the code, reuse the synchronous code. I at least the package that I found are basically doing both, and they can just like reuse existing synchronous code. But yeah, that's like a data point that I found. Maybe there are actually people who are doing things that are not possible in CJS, like they're not possible without asynchronous hooks, but haven't found them so far. The only complaint I got before was from Mateo about network import, but he also now says that it's fine to just do the worker thing and de-async by themselves.
would there be any reasonable usage of some external dependency that's not necessarily across a network, but maybe like hitting a database or something like SQLite or trying to think of all of the things that may take like a long indeterminate amount of time. Because if there are use cases for that, then that would suggest async. But
I
if
guess if
not, then
you're for like downstream users, if your app is not doing anything interesting until everything is loaded, then you're kind of already blocked on the whole thing anyway. Unless you're doing dynamic import. But I guess with dynamic import, you probably want to architect your app in a way that your dynamic import are like in a pool, in a worker pool, that kind of stuff, instead of having a loader that posts message for every step of the module loading. I guess the most optimal architecture would be like do a high level of threading instead of counting on lower level threads posting too many messages.
Yeah,
But for
Guy,
static
isn't
import, I don't think they would really matter that much.
that pre-import hook you were working on basically for this case?
Sorry?
Yeah, I can address that. So yeah, I mean, I agree about the concern with regards to a lot of messaging, especially like I guess well, let me post Bradley's old loader design document in the chat. This is from 2019. And the original justification for off thread there is kind of seems to come from a security argument. It's sort of motivated around Spectre and poisoning, and it seems to be. This async thing sort of came later on when we had to deal with the import.meta.resolve situation, and then the combination of the two, with Bradley having laid this groundwork for the architecture and us needing a solution at the time, kind of pushed us in that direction. And Jake, did a huge amount of work to get that over the line. But yeah, agreed about the concerns of that, that maybe this is motivated originally. Bradley also mentions, like, you thinking of in terms of service workers, or the fact that browsers have a dedicated network thread, and thinking that we might need something similar in Node.js that's kind of orchestrating everything. But one of the differences there is that the network thread maybe is even less noisy than our messaging, which is very noisy because there is a lot of resolve operations, because you could have 10 modules, but you could have 50 imports, and each of those imports going through a resolve operation with messaging. It's not just an n, it's an n times m. So like, agreed about the concern of that noise. But yeah, if anyone's interested in reading his original security arguments, it could be interesting to just have a look at that. I don't know how motivated or justified those arguments still are today, or if anyone is still interested in them. But the async story, the way the browser works as well is it has a synchronous resolver. So when you're linking modules, everything's happening synchronously. But the network, so you've got two phases: the original loading phase, which gets everything available synchronously, and then when linking actually happens, it is synchronous in the browser. So there's no reason that linking and loading hooks can't be synchronous in a two-phase loading model, which is what browsers do anyway. The network system determines what to fetch, and you effectively do end up well, there are some timing things with import maps where you can potentially fetch the wrong thing if you don't have the full import map yet, and the speculative loader can fetch URLs before it knows the full mapping for them. But we avoid those cases by locking down the import maps in browsers. So that's a whole nother issue around the sort of, is your first stage network loader getting the same resolutions as your second stage linker? Regardless, the two-stage model is kind of the model. And if you break it up into two stages, you can say that you've got fully synchronous linking and loading, and then an initial stage, which is the network stage, which goes and makes sure that everything is available synchronously that needs to be available. So yeah, I proposed a pre-import hook a while back. I can see if I can find the PR for that, which at the time I believe needed further justification. But using something like a pre-import hook, you could replicate the network import loader while having sync hooks. So it would be an asynchronous hook, the only asynchronous hook, or one of the only asynchronous hooks that would be called every time you do a dynamic import, and every time you have a top level load in the module system, which would otherwise be creating a worker or the entry point to the Node.js process. And a single asynchronous hook that runs and that can check all the modules and make sure that everything's available from the network if there's any steps that need to be done or any asynchronous processing steps that need to be done. After which it can populate its own internal cache, and a synchronous resolve and a synchronous load could be implemented. So maybe that's one way. I mean, of course, there's also the you can construct a thread and syncify an asynchronous operation as well. But maybe between those two ways, that would satisfy all the requirements for these use cases that you can still have loaders that import that implement network imports, but on a synchronous hook model. Yeah, so that would be the suggestion. That would be my suggestion for like if I would be completely happy with moving to a synchronous hooks model on the same thread, provided we had something like this so we can still implement these use cases. I'm also completely happy with keeping it on a worker thread as well.
Are there
You're muted, Jeffrey.
Sorry. When I was asking you about this, I feel like one thing that stuck out to me was that there seemed to be one big advantage of the pre-import versus the async, or however we do like syncification of network calls, which would be that the putting like, say, all the network fetches for like the entire module graph, say if all of those happened up front in the pre-import hook before resolve and load for all of those modules ran, then all of those network fetches could happen just as regular async calls, like non-blocking. So they could all happen in parallel. The main thread could continue to function as a server responding to requests or whatever it does. And it's like it functions like more like a traditional Node app than like syncifying a network call and blocking the main thread while it's happening and stuff like that. So that appealed to me a lot. The main complication that seemed to be was like, well, if you're going to be like resolving and loading essentially the entire module graph within this pre-import hook, you're going to want to use the resolve and load hook, so that you're not like doing it uncustomized up here and then it gets customized later or something. So something we were talking about was like maybe the pre-import hook, like say it has a signature similar to resolve, like specifier context next or something like that. Maybe there could be like context.resolve, context.load that are the other hook chains. So like within pre-import, you can call context.resolve and then it uses the customized resolve chain to do its work. Something like that. I don't know if there's any complication with how this integrates with CommonJS, I think like in an all CommonJS app, pre-import would just run once to the entry point and any worker entry points, like that's it. But well, I guess CommonJS can have dynamic import also. So yeah, maybe it can run there too. But anyway, I like the idea because I think it felt less hacky and problematic than blocking the process. So
Yeah,
Are
it
there
definitely.
any
Sorry, go.
are there any like actual packages using this model?
I mean, the browser. So
I mean, Node.js packages.
using what
Like
model exactly?
people,
Like pre-import, you mean, or
I mean, like counting on this to work, or
counting
like
on what to work?
building on top of this concept.
Which concept? The pre-import thing that doesn't exist yet?
No, like being able to do this asynchronously.
Oh, as in like, are there going to be any existing packages that use the current hooks API that are going to need to migrate or might have trouble migrating because they're expecting to work asynchronously, in other words?
Yeah.
That's the question. I mean, that's what I asked in that issue yesterday. It's only been a day, so presumably someone will come out of the woodwork. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to know what ones you did research on. Like if you want to make a document somewhere with a list of the ones you looked into. But yeah, that's what I'd really love to know, because if most of them are doing work that's sync or that could trivially become sync, like changing read file to read file sync or something like that, then we're in good shape. And it sounds like maybe what you found, because they're supporting CommonJS monkey patching as well, they're already generally all sync in addition to if they have an async version. But yeah, I'd love to confirm that, because that's I think if it's a minority, but it's a sizable minority, like a third, do something async that wouldn't be easy to migrate, then it would be like, okay, then we have to make sure that get a bunch of representative cases and say we add the pre-import hook and we have the sync hooks on thread. We could just try to migrate them and see how hard it is. Another option would be we do Mateo's idea of make a DA-sync package that we just publish to npm that bespoke creates the worker thread and does atomic to wait, and then that can de-asyncify anything and see okay, well, how well does it work to use that to migrate these. Personally, I would love to. I was thinking I would want to get this overall API to be stable in Node 23. If we're making this big of a change, I don't know if that's realistic, but one thing we could do is maybe land this work on main, and not release it on any release lines until 23. So it'd be like, don't backport to 22 or below. And then it would all come out in 23.0.0. And between now and October, hopefully we both put the hooks on the main thread, make them sync, and add the pre-import hook. I don't know what else we would need, but so 3-ish PRs that could all land on main and not be released, and we can test it out on main as best we can, try migrating the most prominent packages that use loader hooks, etc. Do all that work against main or nightly, and just hold it unreleased until October. Maybe do some of the work also that you were working on, Joey, of further integration with CommonJS Loader.
I think I'll still need to think about the pre-import hook because I think that looks like that looks not too different from the link hook in my proposal,
Hmm.
except that it doesn't do much. It doesn't allow you to customize much.
So to clarify,
It
pre-import
returns
hook
with
is only
no.
top level import. So it wouldn't be for every module. It would only be for a module that is a top level import operation, which corresponds to a, a top level load in the algorithm.
Wouldn't that be like not really, problem if you just like add a is top level Boolean to the context and people can just filter that?
Because it's asynchronous, if it were to apply to every single module, then you would need to and you wanted hooks, then you're no longer writing a synchronous hook, I think.
But we are also discussing making the hooks are synchronously,
Making the hook what synchronously?
making them all synchronous.
Well, I think the idea would be that the pre-import would be async because it could be, and then that gives users a place to put all their async work. All the network
Wait,
calls
though.
they want to make.
How would it work if the pre-import is async? It goes off, does its things, and then like in the meantime, resolve and um, load are synchronous, but they sort of depend on the result of this pre-import. What happens if the pre-import is not done?
So pre-import blocks the loading from continuing until the promise for the pre-import resolves. So
Okay.
you've got an initial specifier that you're passing to dynamic import or the top level load of the application or worker. You're doing any asynchronous work and you're not doing any module graph loading until that promise is finished. And then that loading operation can resume doing recursive operations, but those recursive operations are all then fully synchronous.
Okay, cool. So it's async up until blast off, and then everything waits.
Yes, and it would work with dynamic import because dynamic import's async. If we did have some synchronous import in future, like an import.sync, it wouldn't work with that.
It would not work.
Or require ESM?
Yeah, so it wouldn't work for require ESM either. Although in theory, if the top level entry point of the application still ran the pre-import hook, you could statically analyze requires and do some kind of static step. But the constraints are the same constraints for why CommonJS can't support network imports unless you do a static analysis.
But we have require ESM now, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it
Break
doesn't work for anything with top level await, and that's essentially the same restriction. Like
Okay.
like having an async pre-import hook is like having top level await in the module.
Okay, got it.
So sorry, someone's gonna say something.
No, I was saying, so what now?
I think if this is the direction we want to go, then maybe we can. So we can. I can think of like two potential approaches, and feel free to suggest other ideas. But the two that come to mind are, we basically make a design document similar to what Joey started for the Think Hook proposal. That maybe it's based on the ones he has already, but that assumes this idea that I think the one that Joey started assumes that the current hooks would stay where they are, and then these new hooks would just live, in addition, right? We should just make a new document that's describes resolve and load migrate from being off thread to on thread. I I assume initialize goes away, and then we have to describe what happens to register, and then sketch out pre-import and or link and any other hooks that we think we need. Bang out that document, get it ship shape where everyone's happy with it, and land it, and then just go implement it. The other idea I had was someone could just make a PR to do at least the first step of get rid of the worker thread or the hook thread. I assume get rid of initialize, do something with register, make resolve and load sync, and stop. You know, and then we're missing the pre-import hook, but then that could come as a follow-up PR, and then we'd have to see what other follow-up we need. But all of this work from the first PR would be on main only and held back from being released until whenever we think. You know, I guess that's another question: is like, are we okay with if we landed on main, then it will go out in 23. So like, if we think we can't get this all done before October, then we'll have to like do it all in a separate branch or fork or something like that. But you know, if we're only talking like 3-ish PRs for something that you know, could be good enough to release, and then we can keep building on top of it, but the first stuff is good enough that it could be public, then that's probably safe to assume we can do 3 PRs in, what is it, 4 months. But I don't know. What do you guys all think?
I think that design document sounds like the way to go because we have like so many moving pieces that if we have a bunch of pull requests that are popping up, it could be very easy for them to become misaligned and disconnected.
Okay. I'm happy to start that, or Joey, do you feel like you want to draft it, or what do you think? Or somebody else?
Draft what?
A design doc for what we're talking about? For moving the current hooks on thread.
Like
Um,
the design document that encompasses the thread removal, synchronizing the ESM hooks and your stuff. So it's all living together and one big happy family.
I feel like that would be too much an undertaking for my part, because I'm currently mostly looking into how to get rid of the CJS monkey patching instead of thinking about what the ESM loader should do. Because the other proposal, the top priority is to deprecate CJS monkey patching. And I think everything kind of like everything else is kind of like a sub priority.
Well, I think the idea would be that this should be able to deprecate CDS monkey patching, right? Like this is close enough to your proposal that, like, what else would it need? Like we would need to call these hooks from the CDS loader where they're not currently being called, which I think was part of your proposal, but that should be easy enough to add. And if we need to add any additional hooks like your export hook or link hook or whatever, then those can be added to the proposal or added as follow-up. But wouldn't this essentially get us a lot of the way there towards the goal of getting rid of CDS monkey patching?
Maybe a good way to go about it is to continue to develop both design documents in parallel. Try to get them to their simplest designs and then compare the design documents and see if a unification is sensible. And that way there's like a good, like the more design work, the better, right? So if Joy's already doing the design work for CJS hooks and is coming up with the best design for that problem, and we have the existing design work on ESM hooks and can put together the best design for that problem and have both written up formally and then do a comparison between them, it should be glaringly obvious at that point if there is a simplification and a unification to be found, or if there are frictions in that process. And then a decision could be made either way. I mean, I understand the benefit of having a single unified set of hooks, but there's also benefit in having more design work. And if they really are trending towards the same solution, then it should be obvious in comparing them. Sure.
Actually thinking about the migration plan, I think it might be kind of not wise to kind of just break the existing API as opposed to like you expose a new one and you deprecate the old one. Because otherwise, if you already have reliance on the alpha hooks, how are you supposed to do feature detect to like you just have one package and you want it to work on multiple node versions? How are you supposed to know like whether I'm on the same thread or not? Are you going to do version detect? Then that means the new thread, the new infrared thing cannot be backported to the older node releases. So which means that will kind of stretch out the adoption like timing of this. But if you just add a different thing that can be backported to older releases, you can just kind of like go all the way back and make
Couldn't they
all
just
node
check
supported
if-
releases, like make it available to all node support releases and deprecate monkey patching sooner. But if you're going to do it in a way that kind of like replace an existing thing, then that would be silver major, and that would you would get no adoption on other release lines, and that would kind of like make adoption harder.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Jacob?
Couldn't, if they're, in terms of like feature detection, could they just check whether their hook is in a thread? Because if it is in a thread, then it's the old node thing. If it's not in a thread, then it's the new node thing.
How does the hook know it's in a thread?
It can check that from
Worker thread is main thread.
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
exactly.
Yeah, but that'll only tell if it's in. That'll tell us that it's not in the main thread. It won't tell it can't tell the difference between being in the hook thread that we have currently versus being in like an application worker thread.
Why would a hook be in an application worker thread?
You can have additional loaders for a worker thread. Like they're not necessarily shared across all the user worker threads. You can have user worker threads and you want to patch the loading in that user worker thread.
In like before we move things off thread, the hooks were registered and how it currently works for monkey patching. If they're on the same thread as the application code, both the main thread and then if your application code spawns worker threads, they're also on each of those worker threads. So like it can know that it may not be on the main thread, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's on the hook thread. It might just be an on-thread hook or on-thread loader on a application worker thread. Guy.
Gotcha.
Yeah, one thing I would also add is when it comes to the threading model, the current register behavior is really great because you register a module that is doing your hooking, and when you spawn a new worker, you can immediately find that same module and have another set of hook chains that are instantiated that you know will have the same behaviors. One thing I'm concerned about with Joy's current design is that it's not obvious how a worker will get the same hooks attached. And one of the things that we're trying to do at the moment in TC39 is make it easier to work with workers. And I think one of the features that makes it easier to work with workers is knowing that you're going to get the same resolution environment that we have solved for this register system for loaders already. So I'd strongly encourage Jory, if it's possible for your design to fit into the existing register design, maybe there's some kind of like export loader version constant or something in that module that can tell it, what version of the loader it's running or what type of loader it's running, or what version of the hooks it's running. But it would be great if we could have that same feature where if you do a registration on the main thread and you spawn a worker, we know that we can replicate those registrations for the worker, so that if you're registering TypeScript loaders and you're registering network loaders, whatever you're doing, you can automatically get that for workers without having to instrument your workers individually, because that would be part of, a lot of what we're trying to do with workers is remove those frictions. And if we could have that as well, that would be great.
Yeah, I think there are kind of two aspects of this, like whether you want an instance of loader shared by all your threads, or do you want them to have different instances of the same source code or like application, like code that you load to do the loader thing. I think what people want is the latter, at least according to the recent worker thread regression that Matteo was like, I think Matteo and a bunch of others were pretty strongly against like having a shared instance across different threads. It's prefer that you're able to like customize different loaders on different threads. And on top of that, it would be nice to be able to like have shared configuration about what loaders you want, but they're not supposed to be like the shared instance. Another thing that also came up in my original issue was I think someone from Sentry about, is there a way to like configure loaders without having to load the package or doing a command line option? I think that could be a kind of like a separate thing that we need to think about configuration, maybe like something in package.json, like you specify how the loaders are supposed to be added to different workers and like the
So
policy of this.
so
But
that was like a big reason why register was created, because people wanted to be able to register loaders without having to pass a flag. So that's like handled. If they want to be able to do it like not at runtime, like somehow earlier, I think we talked about that many times over the years, and I think that the solution there is like a config file for Node itself, and that's what end file was meant to be the precursor, or is meant to be the precursor for. I mean, M
yeah,
file essentially is a config file, or it would be if we make it load automatically.
I think regardless of how the configuration is done, it's kind of like parallel to the API question, because the API is like just for the instance, whereas how you're going to share the configuration across different threads, that's a different concern. But the API will still remain the same, and you're going to have like each instance is going to use the same API, but you're just going to load the same like hook module multiple times, but they're still going to use the same API, and the shareableness is not necessarily surfacing in the API design.
I think the problem there is if the API makes it very easy, like the current monkey patching, to just add hooks, then users will do that, and then they just won't get the same hooks in workers. And it would be nice if we could just, not that it's not customizable, I think customizability would be great, but I think if the default experience would be that the hooks are shared with workers, and whatever hooks you registered on the main thread, as soon as you spawn a worker, those workers will get those same hooks in the default case or some kind of default case, I think would be really beneficial. especially that's the default observability case as well, right? I mean, that's what you want in APM, surely.
Yeah, I was
Uh,
just thinking. Oh, sorry, Joey.
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. I'll need to recheck the issues, but I think what people like the most intuitive behavior that people expected in previous issues and the recent regression was that you do it via currently you do it via either inheriting or extending the command line arguments that you pass, like the exact RGV you pass to workers. And that's like the most flexible thing you can do with the configuration. Like suppose you don't want shared. Suppose you don't want it shared, then how are you supposed to do this?
So a few things, but first off, I think the people that were broken by having it, but the way they had it, like they all were running the same code and for workers. They were not running like different hooks in different threads, but they wanted the threads to have different like context data. But I don't think that that's like the most common use case. Like I think it's probably it's the only use case that's ever existed. So like of course there are people relying on it, but there's a much bigger use case of like translation where you want to have one shared translation cache among all your threads. So you're not retranspiling the same file over and over again for each thread. But I'm not sure that that's something we need to support. Like no one's relying on that. No one's asked for it. It would be quite complicated to build. Like I don't know how we would use something that's like, like a global scope that's shared across threads or something. So maybe that's just something that we just decide is like outside of our scope and something that TC39 figures out. The other thought I had was in terms of separate APIs, we can backport it. That's a very good point, and I absolutely agree with you on that. Maybe this is something, if we're going to preserve register, more or less as it is, then maybe that's kind of a way we can do this, where like, register takes two arguments. The second argument is an options bag, so that we can add an option that's like off thread true or something like that to opt into registering the hooks in the hooks thread for or maybe I guess it would have to be the reverse, be backportable, like use legacy true, or I don't know, whatever. But like that could be how we build the new API alongside the old, and then once we get rid of the ability to spawn the hook thread, we just get rid of that option and register as a Semver major. Well, I guess it wouldn't even need to be Semver major because it's experimental, but we could get rid of it as a Semver major break. And then likewise, like new worker is like specify or path and then options, and that options bag is full of node stuff like exec RV. We could throw something in there that's like, inherit module customization hook true or false or whatever. And then, we could or put that option on register, like register restrict to current thread only true or something like that, or pass down to new workers spawned true or whatever, so that like in one place or the other or both places you can control if these hooks that you've registered could be inherited by any workers that you spawn. Something like that. Does that work?
Something like that would work for me.
Sorry, what'd you say, Guy?
I was just confirming Jeffrey's question that something like that sort of design makes sense to me.
I'm still not sure if I'm following what Jeffrey was describing.
Which part?
I guess it kind of I started to get lost in the middle. Sorry.
I was just saying that like both register and new worker have second arguments that are options objects. So we could use that to our advantage, both for the use case of like allowing the user to define whether or not the registered hooks get passed down into worker threads that the user spawns. But also to agree with your suggestion of making this a separate API that we backport. Like you know, like maybe the way to opt in to or opt out of the new approach is through some additional option in register. And that way, like we can backport that option in register to all the old release lines or something like that. I mean, or we could just make a new register, like register hook from node module, but I'd rather keep I feel like it'll be more convenient to just keep register, and then they can customize the options object is easier to customize than like having two calls where it's like if this call register, else call register hooks or something like that.
I think it would be less confusing to just have like a different name, and you just, if this name exists, I do this, otherwise I try to do the other, otherwise I don't. Or like otherwise I monkey patch. That would be the most intuitive like workflow in terms of how the users are going to rely on, like adapt to different versions of APIs that they have seen available in the Node.js being run.
Well, we could figure that out in the design document. Like that's just the implementation detail. But anyway, we're at time. Is there anything else to cover? So I guess I'll take the lead on whenever I find the time to start drafting this document. I'll probably base it on Joyce and go from there. Are there any other next steps that any of us should take in the meantime?
List of packages that
Oh, do
do
you mind putting that together, Joy, or
I
sharing what you have?
I have a very short list in my proposal, I think. I'm pretty sure I listed them in my proposal, but that's not a very extensive list. I'm pretty sure there are
Well, I
others.
think you were looking at packages that monkey path, right? But for the thing I was going to write, we need the packages that are using the existing hooks API.
Right. But are not do monkey patch, do you mean?
Well, they could also monkey path, but I mean, I think we need a list of both, right? We need we need a bunch of packages that monkey path and a bunch of packages that use the current hooks API. And then, you know, that's the goal. It's like for this, you know, the top 10
Yeah.
monkey pathers and the top 10 hooks packages, what's their migration path look like? And that's how we know whether we're on the right track or not.
Yeah,
Right?
my point is kind of like I cannot find any that only does that only use the new API without doing anything for the old. That's my point. It's kind of like when I try to find packages that use top level, I couldn't find any. I just couldn't.
Well, then how about this then? Maybe a list of packages that maybe 3 lists. One that's like they use both APIs, and then packages that only use one, packages that only use the other. And maybe there's not very many, or if any, packages that only use the new hook. And that's fine.
Why don't we all just comment on the ones that we know about and we can add them to the list that way?
Sure. There's a document in the loaders repo already called like resources.md, and it's listing packages that use the loaders API. So I think that would be a great place to like just put this list. So if you want to like start a PR against that file, adding all the ones you know of, require in the middle and import in the middle are probably 2 prominent ones, and those at least are probably I think import in the middle probably doesn't do monkey patching. It only does the new one, I would think. So there's at least one example. Jacob?
They're kind of
Should we tweet out on the Node account that like, hey, we're thinking of doing this. If this is relevant to you, please let us know you exist.
Maybe after we have the design doc, because otherwise people might be like, so what exactly are you planning to do? What are the details? How is it going to break me? And until we
Yes,
have
yeah.
answers to any of those questions.
Okay, cool.
All right, anything else? Thank you, everybody.